Good afternoon, everyone. So today we are going to be talking about plant phylogeny, specifically the different characteristics of land plants that we might know. And this is just at the introductory level. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is share my screen, desktop. Bam. So let's talk about plant phylogeny. So when we think of phylogeny, we think of phylogenetic trees, right? And for those of you who don't know what a phylogenetic tree is, if you've ever seen something like it looks like a bracket for a tournament, that's essentially a phylogenetic tree, and we use that a lot in biology. It's to say, well, what evolved kind of first? Who are some of our oldest relatives? What evolved kind of last? And when did they diverge from their common ancestor? So here I kind of drew a little phylogenetic tree. Very beautiful. Because I'm an artist, obviously. But today we're going to talk about plant phylogeny, specifically land plants, and what makes them unique in each kind of phyla. And when we talk at the introductory level of plant phylogeny, we really talk about the four main groups are non-vascular, there's a hyphen there, slash non-seeding plants are vascular seeding plants, or sorry, jumping ahead of the gun, non-seeding plants are vascular, I can't spell, seeding plants, and are flowering fruiting plants. Okay. And we usually categorize them in of these four different groups, different phylas. So because we're using plants, I'm going to use my beautiful green color. This first one we would categorize as our bryophytes. So bryo, and then phyte is PHYTES. Now, key thing here, whenever you see this term, phytes, you can almost always assume you're working with some sort of plant. So if you come across an exam or a test question or something that says, oh, this is a something phyte, is it a fungus, an animal, a plant, or whatever, phyte gives it away, tells you it's a plant. So we have our bryophytes, our vascular non-seeding plants. These would be our pterophytes, and we have a P in front. The P is silent. Now, a lot of you might ask, well, why do we spell these things this way? And that's because way back in the heyday, they used a lot of Greek and Latin roots to describe things, and we follow suit now because we don't like to change things up. So again, phytes are vascular seeding plants. Now, some of you might think, okay, it's going to be something phytes. It's not. It's actually going to be called our gymnosperms. meaning our naked seeds. And then the last one, our youngest, would be our angiosperms. Or our vesseled seeds. Remember those little terms. Okay, so how do we group this in our phylogeny? So one way that we do it, we need to say, okay, we have which ones are oldest, which ones are youngest, and which ones somewhere in between. And we always want to put our common ancestor. So the longer our line, our phylogeny, that means the younger or the older it is. So this one right here being the shortest, and we can probably say like, oh well, what about this one? Well, this one I've decided is going to be a little bit longer. There you go. So it's older. And most of the time we assume that the one, if we're having something set like this one would be a lot younger. And you might ask, okay, well, you say younger, older, does that mean like a few days, a few years? We're talking about millions, thousands, millions of years of evolution occurring. This just doesn't happen suddenly. Okay, so I'm gonna say, okay, so we're gonna use this tree right here. And remember how I said, well, we're gonna be working with 4. Here I have 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, why do I have 5? Shouldn't we have 4? That's a good question. The reason why we have 5, and you remember how I said we should always have somewhere an ancient ancestor or most closely related group to kind of say, okay, well, it's probably derived from these. And all of these right here, these are land plants. So any plant that you find on land, they fall into one of these categories. So if 4 of those are land plants, well, life derived from the ocean, right? So these would be our aquatic plants. And you guys can probably be like, well, what's an example of an aquatic plant? Well, green algae, right? Green algae is an aquatic plant. So we'll put our aquatic plants there. Bam, good. We got our aquatic plants. Okay, so the next thing we do is we mark, okay, where here we see them kind of go either this way or this way, right? And that's good to know, but at what point did they change characteristics? Just because you have 2 different ways, that we need to know, well, where did they really change characteristics? And that's somewhere right, sorry. That's somewhere right here, where our land plants, our aquatic plants and our land plants diverge. So this, I would say, this is our little move to land. Right? Cool. And some unique trait right here. Put that little star. This is a ancient, it might not be so ancient if these plants still are around, ancestor. Woohoo. Okay. All right, so The move to land, cool. So when plants move to land, they were very similar to our aquatic plants. They relied on water to reproduce. They didn't have any structure for them to really fight gravity. So a lot of these plants, they lacked vascular tissue. So like phloem, xylem, which allowed nutrients, water, and structure to land plants that we see today, that was non-existent. And this thing of seeds, well, they didn't really need seeds because they didn't really grow very far, and water, they used water to move around their gametes. So our first one to kind of evolve would be right here, these bryophytes, number one. Oh, I wrote bio wrong. Bryophytes. Okay, cool. Those ones, those were around. Well, as time went on, plants, they need space to grow, right? You want space to grow your family, kind of thing. And in order to do that, they needed to be able to spread out further from and get a little taller because they need that sunlight. They want to outcompete. They still needed water to reproduce, but they could now transport and fight gravity. So the next thing to develop was vascular tissue. So here we see that everything after this tele, these are all land plants, and everything after this tele are all vascular plants. Okay. So they developed vascular tissue. They still required water to reproduce. So these are like your ferns, where they have the spores and the gametes, and they require water so that the gametes meet each other and become a zygote. But as you know, as you guys know, ferns do not produce seeds. There's no seeds in ferns. So your vascular non-seeding plants, that's our number 2 to evolve, are pterophytes. Beep. Pterophytes. Okay, cool. So we got our second one. And if we look back to the list, oh, well, we see everything else has a seed and flowers and fruits. Well, fruits have seeds too, right? So we know our next thing to develop are seeds. Now, which one came first? The gymnosperm or the angiosperm? Well, I can tell you very quickly right now that the angiosperm came last. They're the youngest of our phylas. They're the and they're also the most diverse. Okay, cool. So our angiosperms and our gymnosperms. So gymnosperms came first, so that's our number 3. And gymnosperms, they develop their seeds. They don't have any flowers or fruits, so they primarily relied on wind to allow their spores to fertilize the cones, their pollen, excuse me, not their spores. So gymnosperms. And then lastly are angiosperms. Well, it's great that you have wind to transfer your pollen, but wouldn't it also be great if you utilize something else to transfer your pollen? What if it wasn't very windy for a couple of weeks, and you were ready to reproduce as a plant? You're like, yeah, I'm ready to send my pollen out there and make babies. And so to kind of overcome this, angiosperms utilized animals or insects and mammals now to disperse their pollen. So insects are like bees, moths, flies are pollinators. They pollinate the flowers. So that was our next trait to evolve. Flowers and fruit. In our angiosperms. Now, flowers attracted pollinators to help pollinate so that angiosperms didn't have to fully rely on the climate or the weather. They could also utilize animals and other organisms to help pollinate themselves and spread their seed. And literally to spread their seed. With the development of fruit, their seeds would be covered with a fleshy fruit, which attracted herbivores and omnivores to eat the fruit and, poop and fertilize their seeds along their way and really spread out. And that's really why angiosperms have been so successful as a group of plants, because they've utilized animals to spread their seeds across the world. And so there we have it. We have our phylogeny, our introductory phylogeny to land plants and plants. We have our ancient ancestor, which gave us our aquatic plants and our land plants, moved to land, which consists of bryophytes, pterophytes, gymnosperms, angiosperms. And then these are our little cases. Angiosperms, youngest and most diverse of all of them. They're the baby and they're the most successful. All right, I hope you enjoyed this. Good luck.